Welcome back. I'm that chemist, and today we have a special Q&A in honor of my 27th birthday. I'm going to answer 27 questions. I'm also not typically on cam, but I thought that this would be a good chance to test out this format and see how you guys like it. So without further ado, let's get started. What's a piece of advice you'd give to an aspiring research chemist that you feel is often not taught in school that you learned through your own experiences? Oftentimes, your professor might not have a good idea about your project. Sometimes you need to talk to other people in the field, including people in your lab, to see whether or not the project is well thought out or if they're just giving you kind of like a nothing project to work on. And the other thing that you think is immediately when you're entering the lab, you need to be working on something that's really important and like up and coming in the field. And you might have all these ideas that you know everything there is to know about chemistry. Maybe you thought all of the reactions you learned in your undergrad organic chemistry class would just prepare you for everything, but that's not necessarily the case. So there's a lot of different things that you might want to do in research, which could be totally not related to what your supervisor's working on. The difference between a good idea and a bad one isn't so straightforward. Oftentimes, the things that get published that are really noteworthy are things that are accidentally discovered. So those are a couple ideas that you might be interested in thinking about. I would also encourage you to use online resources such as Not Voodoo X and talk to people, for instance, in the That Chemist Discord. There's a lot of really helpful people. And sometimes people are like not super willing to reach out and get help, but definitely get help when you need it. Question: if you were to choose another field in chemistry, which one would that be? Also, do you have a least favorite field in chemistry, and if so, why? So at the moment, one area that I'd be interested in getting into more would be metallophotororedox chemistry. I think there's a lot of utility there. That's going to be pretty important moving forward. I also think physical chemistry is a little bit promising, specifically in terms of the utility for organic chemistry, because, for instance, Mayer's end parameters are really useful. I think it could help direct the field in terms of reaction discovery. Now, my least favorite field in chemistry is probably analytical chemistry, because developing new methods that people actually can utilize is rather hard, because there's such a limited budget for what you can spend on research, especially in terms of instrumentation. So can there be big breakthroughs? Yes. Can they be dramatic for the field? Absolutely. But it's pretty challenging that your research is going to be the one to make that happen. What is the biggest oh snap moment that you had in the lab? Some of the classics would be like, you accidentally heat something too hot and it explodes. One that immediately comes to mind is we were just working in the lab and suddenly there was one of the loudest sounds I'd ever heard. And we went to the part of the lab that the sound had happened in, and an organic waste jug had just exploded. It had ruptured from pressure. I think somebody had added some KMNO4 or another compound that wasn't supposed to go in the organic waste, and it just reacted and produced gas. And because the cap was tightly sealed, the bottle just ruptured, and so we had like an overflow of organic waste over the countertop, and we had to quickly get that dealt with. And so that was like a pretty unfortunate one. Do you do any sort of cooking or baking? There's chemistry involved, which is obvious, but it's neat to see it work out. So believe it or not, I am a chemist, so of course I can cook. If your chemistry skills don't transfer to the kitchen, how practical are they? I'm not sure. For me, cooking is something that I'll do. I can usually make a dish at least taste like a 7 out of 10 just with seasoning. In terms of baking, I've tried my hand at baking bread, and I've tried making pretzels and some other stuff a few times, but I wouldn't necessarily call myself an expert, but I do dabble from time to time. Question: when did you realize that all great chemists and physicists and scientists were just people, normal people like you and me? Bad people, good people, weird people, great people, just people. I ask because a lot of people hero worship them, even I used to. So I had this moment at one point in time when I was in my first year of undergrad that I just kind of thought, well, who's to say what you can and can't do? Like, what do the people who are doing something interesting have that you don't have? Well, there probably is an answer, and maybe that starts with what they're doing. And so if you're interested in being what they are, you have to start doing what they do. And while the way I think about stuff has improved from that was an early way that I thought about stuff that made sense. And it's kind of that like fake it till you make it mentality, but it isn't about faking it. It's about modeling their behavior and incorporating that behavior into your own. So some applicable versions of that would be like, what would a good researcher do? What would a good spouse do? What would a good significant other do? What would a good friend do? And if you can start doing that and you can start living that out, maybe it gets easier from there. So this isn't specific to researchers, scientists in general, but more just people in general. There was this one line from a Triforce podcast, which is a podcast that a few members of the Yogscast do occasionally. And Sips had said there was this one line that his grandma used to always tell him. And the line was, oh, you like Wayne Gretzky? Because Sips is a Canadian. He was into hockey. Oh, you like Wayne Gretzky? Yep. Picture him taking a dump on the toilet. Yep. He just does that just like everybody else. He has to wipe his own butt too. And it is a humbling experience. And when you talk to people who are capable but not entitled, it can be quite refreshing and quite grounding. And so even as the channel's been growing, I have open DMs on Discord, and I try to engage with the community as much as possible. Because I'm just a person too. The only difference is, I guess sometimes I say interesting enough stuff on a regular enough basis that several of you are interested in listening to it, and I'm grateful for that, and hopefully I've earned your attention. As an IT person myself, how much of your work depends on computers? How often did you need help from IT help desk/administrators? So for research, if you're a good researcher, you'll be doing a lot of work with computers. This includes interpreting spectra, reading papers. Some people prefer to print them out, but I think most of the papers I've read have been digitally. Now, there's a lot of writing and reading involved with research. There's a lot of Zoom calls now, especially over computers. And with the YouTube side of things, I have to do almost everything on the computer, which makes sense. Now, is it entirely computer-based? No. When have I had to interact with help desk or administrators? Usually it's when software licenses have run out and for whatever reason they just haven't renewed it in time, and or I'm trying to access a resource off campus and they just haven't got it set up properly. Most of the time when I've needed help, do they come through? Yes. Is it as quickly as I'd like? No. And more often than not, they can't solve your problems, but that's just in my experience. I'm fairly tech savvy, so I can figure out a lot of those solutions on my own. Although for certain stuff like access to resources that are behind paywalls, those you kind of have to go through your university. You can't really shortcut that in most instances. What do you think is the greatest problem in the community that gets in the way of progress, like outdated ideas, dogmas, and conflicts of interest that plague the academic world of chemistry? So some that immediately come to mind for me are, one, people who have status or have high impact publications acting entitled and deserving of what they already have, and they feel like because they're deserving of that, they deserve as much as possible. So maybe it's because of what they've already done, maybe it's what they think their potential is, and everybody has this. It's kind of like that classic adage, everybody thinks they're in the top 50% of IQ, which can't be, right? Everyone can't be in the top 50%. And so on the one hand, yeah, you're putting your best foot forward, you're standing up for yourself. But at the same time, if you lose to someone better than you, they won fair and square. And so you shouldn't be upset about that if you're on Team Humanity. Now, maybe there's things you could have done better, and maybe you should reflect on that. But instead of doing that, I quite often see people saying that, oh, the whole system's corrupt. People who won shouldn't have won. I should have won. And if you really dig down deep to that, it's out of a place of toxicity and not out of one that's good. So I think that's a big issue with academia, and that goes from the researcher all the way to the supervisor, and that applies to almost everyone. Now, problem number 2 is a lack of planning or a lack of informed choice of project. Oftentimes you're just working on stuff, and so you keep working on it. Or there's the sunk cost fallacy. You put so much time into it that you need to keep putting more time into it. And this can be really difficult, and sometimes it's detrimental. And I've talked about this in a video a little bit in the past. So these are harder to address because they're kind of systemic and they happen from the individual psychological level to systemic issues. So this is a more complicated one to solve, but I think it can be solved at the individual level. You take responsibility and you try and be diligent. And the third one I want to mention is a lot of time for research is wasted by misdirection and people not openly sharing ideas with other researchers with expertise. And so for me, I kind of broke this down into a bigger section. And so I think openness in terms of sharing ideas is the most important thing you can do. And so first, you're always going to have more ideas. You can only ever have your last idea once, and that's right before you die. 2, hanging on to an idea that you had so that you can test it instead of giving it to someone who's equipped to test it immediately is a poor choice for everyone involved. Science is a team sport, and you should give good ideas to people who are equipped to test them as quickly as possible. Do it now if you have one. And so this is the idea of, if you're listening to a talk, if you're listening to a presentation and the speaker's there to respond, and based on your work, you see something that they could do, give it to them. That's not going to be your last idea. And if you're like a grad student, you don't know if your supervisor is going to let you test something that day. Maybe your supervisor doesn't even appreciate the utility of it. Maybe if you're going to test it, you have to wait like another 4 to 6 years. But guess what? That supervisor has people in the lab right now. And if you really did have a good idea, share it with them. Right? They could have someone testing it today. And while you might not get co-authored on that, it makes the world a better place. Like, you wouldn't have thought it was a good idea if it wasn't. And if they're smart, they can tune out whether or not it's a good idea. You don't have to do all of that yourself. Next, Be open with research ideas as if it was your last day on Earth. Life is also a team sport. So if you died tomorrow and you were holding on to all those ideas, wouldn't you be upset? Wouldn't you be upset that you didn't share them with the researchers that could have benefited from it? And that could benefit all of us. You don't necessarily know the implications of your research, right? You don't know the end goal of those ideas. And so I think it's really important to share those. Next, work with other researchers without the expectation for them to return the favor. So I think helping people out and not expecting anything in return is a really healthy thing to do. You know, should they return the favor? Yes, but care about people first and results second. And so I think if someone has given you a good idea and you're utilizing it and it's working, make sure you give them credit, right? And so I think the importance here is caring about getting the idea tested first and you getting credit second. And if someone does share it with you, don't be a nugget. Give credit where credit is due. We stand on the shoulders of giants, and you don't lose anything by giving credit where credit is due. If someone gives you an idea freely and you don't cite them, they're never going to give you another idea, and they're going to go give it to someone else, or they're going to do it themselves. And maybe they'll be closed and less likely to share ideas with people, and that's terrible for all of us. Science is collaborative, and we need to work together. And so you want to lower boundaries, lower barriers, make it as easy as possible for people to work with you, and give credit where credit is due. If someone else had the idea and they did most of the work, give them priority in terms of authorship. There's a lot more stuff to talk here, but due to the already increasing length of the episode, I'm going to have to digress. What got you into chemistry? And if I may ask another, what was the best reaction, in your opinion, you got to do in class? So, my high school chemistry teacher inspired me to get into chemistry. When you're a high school student, you get an impression that your teachers are super knowledgeable about chemistry because compared to you, they are. And the further you get down the rabbit hole, the more interesting it is. And so for me, what got me really interested into chemistry was organic chemistry. And it's because it's essentially a game with a lot of complex rules. And the more rules you understand, the better you can play the game. And so that was an inspiring thing for me to learn chemistry. Now, in terms of my favorite reaction, at the end of my second semester organic chemistry lab, we made nylon 6,6. And so you have two monomers, a diamine and an acyl chloride, and you stick a stir rod into the solution and stir it out, and it makes nylon polymer, and you can see both layers of the solution just like collapse towards each other as the reaction proceeds. And so that was like a really cool reaction, and yeah, it was nothing like it. There's been nothing like that in my experience. I'm sure you can find videos of it online. Question: what are the prospective emerging techniques and products, and what do you think their potential impact will be? So the two big areas in my mind are electrochemistry and metallophotoredox chemistry. So metallophotoredox just utilizes redox chemistry along with transition metal cross-coupling chemistry. And I think that's going to be a really wide area moving forward, especially utilizing the recent work from the Macmillan Group, converting alcohols into radicals through their NHC chemistry. I think that's some of the most ambitious, awesome chemistry that exists. And having more methods to form carbon-carbon bonds is always useful. I think it'll revolutionize the way we think about chemistry. A lot of the time we think about oompalongs, but we skip radical oompalongs, so it's important consideration. Would you consider yourself an avid gamer? If so, what are some of your favorites? So I've got a couple of my favorite ones of all time written down, including Minecraft, RimWorld, Slay the Spire, Civ 5, Terraria, Skyrim, several of the Fallout games, Stellaris, and I've played many, many other video games. At the moment, I'm not playing too many games actively, as I'm focusing more and more of my time on creating YouTube videos. Although we do play Jackbox in the Discord quite often, and so if you're interested in playing Jackbox, I'd encourage you to join the Discord. What is the most exotic or cursed compound you've ever worked with? So in my 5 worst smelling compounds video, I talked about this one briefly, but I made this 5-membered ring with phosphoruses, and off of each phosphorus there was a phenyl ring sticking off, and that one's pretty cursed looking. I'll throw a picture of that structure up here as well. If there was one substance you could delete from history/existence, what would that be? Like it was never synthesized, isolated, or discovered. So my answer for this is going to be controversial. Palladium. If there's no palladium, organic chemistry would be a lot more interesting. And I feel like palladium chemistry should be its own field. Instead of being part of chemistry, just the study of palladium. Because palladium can kind of do anything. You just have to screen ligands. So I think people would have to be a lot more creative without palladium, basically. Next. What made you decide to go for a postgraduate degree? I often struggle of thinking of where I'm headed in terms of higher education, and having any bit of insight helps. So for me, it was about research. As I mentioned earlier, the whole game side of chemistry was appealing to me. Like, the game exists, the field of organic chemistry exists, and we're only operating within the current set of rules that we know. This is our understanding of chemistry. And so as you do research, the more rules you understand, the easier it is for you to uncover new rules and play the game more effectively. And so for research, it's essentially like a way for you to invest in yourself and your own skills and ability, but at the same time make a difference. Now, this isn't the main thing that I enjoy about chemistry now, and I'm going to talk about that when I answer another question in a few slides. But in general, tackling the problems you tackle in research are quite appealing. Making molecules that have never been made before is something that's really appealing early on and then gets really annoying later on because you have to characterize it, and full characterization, while it seems straightforward, is frustrating. And you're like, oh, darn, this one hasn't been made before, and I have to do all this extra work. And so, yeah. What was your biggest overreaction to a mistake made in the lab? Like, did you ever spill something and thought it was way worse than it actually was? So when I was in undergrad, I worked with dimethyl sulfate for the first time, and I totally dressed overkill. And my supervisor had talked it up like, oh yeah, it's fine, lots of people use it. And so right before we start working with it, I asked, so when was the first time you worked with it? And he said, right now. And I'm like, you've got to be kidding me. And so if you look at the garb that I was wearing here, I'll put a picture of that up here as well. You can see it's completely overkill. Now, that being said, dimethyl sulfate is terrifying, and it's no joke. It was used as a chemical warfare agent. It's super toxic. And I know someone who's worked with it barehanded before, and he didn't realize how toxic it was. So, he was underkill, but this picture, I was overkill. Now, was this an accident? No, but like spilling a drop of it, using tons of bicarb, waiting ages, maybe it was overkill, maybe not. So 2 people asked, effectively, what's something that you would never work with? There's 2 or 3 real ones for me. One of them is mercury chemistry in general. I think I've only done one reaction with mercury ever, and it was an oxymercuration, which is kind of a coincidence because I just talked about that in the most recent tier list. And in general, I heavily would avoid working with azides or cyanide. Azides both for the toxicity and because they can be explosive. Now, in terms of cyanides, it's just toxic. Like, you usually don't need to work with them, but occasionally you do. Now, the worst that I've worked with is hydrogen sulfide gas. I have generated hydrogen sulfide gas to make ethyl thionoacetate, and that was a really sketchy reaction because hydrogen sulfide is super deadly. It's way more deadly than I realized at that point in time, even though I was being very careful. After seeing the US Chemical Safety Board videos about hydrogen sulfide, I would be far more careful with hydrogen sulfide than I was previously, because it is terrifying how deadly it is. Do your colleagues know you're YouTube famous? If so, what do they think? Also, happy birthday. So they do know, but I don't think they understand quite how popular the channel is. The channel recently surpassed 30 years of watch time, which is older than I am, so that means 30 human years of attention have gone into watching videos from this channel, and I don't take that lightly. Hopefully I'm earning that, and hopefully I'm doing things that are meaningful enough that you want to watch them, or at the very least entertaining enough. Recently, one of them referred to the channel as community outreach, or science community outreach, which I think is a bit funny, and I think it's because they just don't understand how YouTube works. When did you decide that chemistry was your passion? Any specific funny moment or anything? So I kind of already answered this in a few of the other ones. I think when I realized that it was a game, and it kind of reminded me of Hearthstone when I first learned about chemistry, because ordering and stuff matters. Do I play Hearthstone anymore? No, but I used to play a lot of Hearthstone. And so when chemistry became gamified for me, that was when it was something that I could really engage with, because it was clear like, oh, you can kick butt if you know this really well. And, you see someone like with a skateboard do a cool trick or something, yeah, that's pretty cool. But man, when you can propose a good synthetic scheme and it works, it is so much cooler, even if it's the nerdiest thing ever. So we have several questions from this person. 1, do you speak a second or even third language? If not, would you like to learn some? Which ones? So, ich spreche ein bisschen Deutsch, aber es ist nicht so gut. Et je parle un petit peu de français. Donc, je pense que c'est très mal. Y yo hablo español, but it's not that good because I don't know how to say that. I can understand more than I can speak in German, French, and Spanish, but I'm by no means an expert. I was practicing German every day until I started making YouTube videos, and the YouTube just took priority. Es tut mir leid. What is your favorite channel section? Tier list, compilations, etc. So I really like making research-related content, although I do really enjoy the community engagement side of compilations. In general, I like making all of the videos that I make, and if I didn't enjoy doing them, I wouldn't make them. I really like doing the recent video on 8-chlorotheophylline in Gravol. That was a video that I really enjoyed getting to the bottom of. And eventually I'd like to do more IRL in-depth investigations into how certain processes are done so that people can understand them better. What's your favorite food and drink? So my favorite food probably has to be Thai food. I like a good pad Thai and a good curry. And in terms of my favorite drink, I'd have to say Lindemann's Lambic beer, which is Belgian beer. I love that stuff so much, and it is a delicacy here. Are you straight or are you part of the LGBT community? So I am married to my beautiful wife, Teresa. Here are several pictures of us from all of the years we've been together. This most recent picture on the right is when I was a best man at a wedding. And the last question that they had here was about the Discord. So if you aren't a part of the Discord, it's free. Anybody can join. You don't have to pay to join the Discord, and you don't have to be a chemist either. We welcome anybody who wants to join, and we often play games and stuff, and it's just a really fun time. So if you're interested in checking it out, you're welcome to do so, and we'd be happy to have you. And currently the Discord has about 4,000 members. Happy birthday. I'd like to know what your accent is. So I am Canadian. I was born and raised in British Columbia. I often get comments that I sound like Casually Explained, and that's because he is also from the same province as me. And listening to my older videos with my old mic, yes, I do sound like Casually Explained. So it's a West Coast Canadian accent, and I hope you enjoy it. What do you enjoy most about chemistry / your career? So the most meaningful part of chemistry for me is helping other people. I really like helping other people with their projects. I get a lot of meaning out of that. And I also really like working with and mentoring students. I've got to supervise many undergraduate students, and seeing them develop and flourish has been super meaningful to me, and it's been my favorite part about the whole field. While there is the whole game side of it, I really like working on complex problems and teaching people. It's really fun. Hence why I'm doing YouTube. Do you have any regrets or any things you'd do differently? What changed your outlook on life the most? So do I have things I would have done differently? Sure, but life doesn't really work that way. I've learned a lot from my mistakes along the way, and they changed the trajectory of my life, so it's hard to be too cynical about that. In terms of things that have changed my outlook, a lot of important people who've said a lot of important things. Most of all, probably books, and it took me way too long to get on team books. My whole life, up until I was a young adult, I was like opposed to reading books. I thought it was a waste of time, and now I regret that. So I spend a lot of time reading in my free time. I specifically like listening to audiobooks when I go on walks. I try to walk about an hour a day and listen to an audiobook while I'm on my walk. And there's a lot of wisdom in books. You know, there's no coincidence that the only mammals that have writing are people, and you'd think more people would appreciate that and spend time reading. There's a lot of social interactions between animals, and that's not to say that human social interactions aren't important, but I think that we should be spending more time reading important books that have really been worked on to include key points rather than just to fill your attention span and time. I say that on a YouTube video, and I realize that that's hypocritical. But if you have a book that's meaningful that you think you should be reading, I'd prefer that you do that instead of watching this channel. Do important things that matter. Your hands gain the ability to squirt 100% chemical of choice from your palms without hurting you. Solids and gases are allowed. I'll let you choose temperature and pressure. Only one choice / setting. So I think the easy one here is graphene. You just be like Graphene Spider-Man, and that would be really cool. And even if you didn't want to be like Spider-Man and fly around town, you could just supply free graphene, and then maybe we could make the first space elevator. So I think that would be a pretty cool one. Last but not least, we have Why That Chemist? Does this name have a history? So when I was trying to think of a channel name, including that I'm doing chemistry, that I'm talking about chemistry, I thought about some things like The Canadian Chemist, but it just sounded too cringe. And so I decided, you know, I don't need to like be extra. I don't need to be unique. I'm that chemist. Which one? I'm that one. Which chemist is he? He's that chemist. Ironically, almost my entire life, my online alias has been Star Reactor. I've been Star Reactor since I was like 14 or 15. So I've been Star Reactor over 10 years. And I've only been that chemist for under a year. So I would definitely respond more to Star Reactor than that chemist. Although a lot of you have been saying that chemist. And so it's grown on me now. I hope you've enjoyed this Q&A. I hope it's been interesting to listen to, and I hope you have a great day.